Hello everyone, welcome to your Friday edition of Eye on Africa. These are your headlines. A national hero, that is what Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa has called former leader Robert Mugabe, who died today at the age of 95. But the president, who ruled the country for 30 years, leaves a controversial legacy behind him. The fallout continues after days of xenophobic violence in South Africa. A total of 10 people have been killed in attacks against foreign businesses in the country, leading to consequences across the continent. Also coming up, a France 24 report on the ground in central Mali as the United Nations Blue Berets struggle to gain the upper hand amid attacks by jihadists and local militia. He was one of Africa's most controversial leaders who was seen as a liberator and revolutionary hero before becoming a dictator who drove his country's economy into the ground. Today, Zimbabweans have been coming to terms with the death of the country's founding leader. Robert Mugabe was 95. He was first seen as a liberator who rid the former British colony of Rhodesia of white minority rule. But Mugabe later turned to repression and fear to hold on to power until he was eventually ousted in 2017 in a military coup. Reactions on the streets of Harare following the death of the former president have been mixed. Yana Lee has the story.
A divisive statesman. Tributes have been pouring in for Zimbabwe's former president Robert Mugabe. His successor hailed him as the country's commander, liberator, founder and leader.
ZANU-PF, the party which the late departed helped found, has met and accorded him national hero status, which he earned and richly deserves.
Other African heads of state also paid tribute.
We remember him as a towering leader of the struggle for independence of the people of Zimbabwe.
Africa lost an ardent Pan-Africanist. The world also lost a statesman. Statesmen are normally controversial.
Mugabe leaves behind a mixed legacy. The widely admired freedom fighter went on to become a tyrant. He ruled with an iron fist for over 3 decades, crushing any opposition that stood in his way.
Personally, I lost a lot of people, my family, and I saw a lot of suffering because of this man.
Thousands of people were killed in deadly crackdowns in the 1980s. Mugabe is also widely remembered for controversial policies such as the seizure of white-controlled farmland that had devastating consequences on the economy. Opposition leader Nelson Chamisa reacted to his passing, saying that a giant has fallen. He added, though, that the fact that Mugabe died in a Singaporean hospital rather than in Zimbabwe was a sad indictment of the country's economic situation.
Well, many in Zimbabwe remember his legacy as an independence war icon and educationalist. Today, the country enjoys high rates of literacy as a result of Mugabe's commitment to extending education to the black majority. For more on this angle, let's go live to Harare to speak to RFI correspondent Ryan Kerr-Truscott. Ryan, thank you for joining us tonight. Does Mugabe deserve this legacy as an educationist?
Well, there's no denying that things improved dramatically when he took power in 1980. Back then, there were only around 500,000 children enrolled in primary schools here. But by 2014, that figure had risen to 2.7 million. And UNESCO says the adult literacy rate is around 86%, which is one of the highest in Africa. Mugabe was, before he joined the independence struggle, a teacher. And during his many years in detention before independence, he spent that time furthering his own education. And that commitment to self-improvement appears to be something that's rubbed off on many people in this country. Many young people here pursue masters and doctorates and that sort of thing. It's been interesting to see today prominent Zimbabweans saying how they benefited in terms of education because of Mugabe. People like Trevor Nube, a prominent local publisher, and Lovemore Maduku, a prominent constitutional lawyer. But despite the gains made in education under Mugabe, he is accused of undermining so much else in the country because of his desire to cling to power.
Is there a sense that in the region people are willing to overlook Mugabe's reputation as a despot and instead hail him as a Pan-Africanist hero?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, just look at the way that President Uhuru Kenyatta has declared 3 days of national mourning for Mugabe in Kenya. He called him a shining beacon and an African hero. And then President Edgar Lungu of Zambia said today that Mugabe's place in the annals of Africa's political history is assured. I think throughout Africa, Mugabe is seen as a hero, as someone who had the guts to stand up to Western nations. Also, his controversial land reform program, which saw the takeover of productive white-owned farms for redistribution to blacks, that's something that's regarded by many in Africa as a bold and necessary move, even if it did trigger a long-running economic crisis. I think many in this country have to live with the fallout of Mugabe's controversial policies, though, and in that respect, I think he may be more revered outside the country than he is at home.
All right, RFI's Ryan Kerr-Trescott in the Zimbabwean capital for us tonight. The fallout continues after a week of xenophobic attacks in South Africa, which were followed by retaliation in several African countries. The latest violence has also taken a political turn, with South Africa closing its diplomatic missions in Abuja and Lagos. The riots began after disenfranchised young South Africans launched attacks on foreign businesses, accusing them of stealing South African jobs. Laurent Bersecher has the very latest.
Scenes of violence in the DRC's second largest city. Angry crowds looted South African-owned stores and tried to break into Lubumbashi's South African consulate on Thursday.
Look at what's going on in South Africa. We Congolese have to act.
The unrest in the DRC followed similar scenes in Nigeria and Zambia, where South African businesses were targeted by angry mobs earlier this week. Political tensions also remained high as Nigeria's government recalled its ambassador to Pretoria and pulled out of a major economic forum in Cape Town, while South Africa closed its diplomatic missions in Abuja and Lagos, citing security reasons. The row was sparked by a series of xenophobic attacks in South Africa this past week, which saw hundreds of rioters torch foreign-owned shops and homes in Johannesburg, killing at least 10 people since Sunday. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa condemned the attacks and issued a call for calm.
There can be no excuse for the attacks on the homes and businesses of foreign nationals, just as there can be no excuse whatsoever for xenophobia or any form of intolerance.
The Johannesburg riots have sparked a massive backlash across the continent, where many are calling for a boycott of South African products and businesses. 2 Nigerian pop stars have already cancelled planned shows in Johannesburg, while the Madagascar and Zambia national football teams both called off games against South Africa.
Pope Francis has arrived in Antananarivo. Hundreds of people lined the road linking the airport to the city, cheering at the Pope's motorcade. The country, which is majority Christian, declared Friday a national holiday in honor of the visit. The pontiff landed in Madagascar's capital following a trip to nearby Mozambique. The visit to 2 of the world's poorest countries is seen as an act of solidarity with the less fortunate. At a mass gathering in the Mozambican capital of Maputo on Friday, Pope Francis told the crowd of about 60,000 not to resort to vengeance and instead reject hate. Brutal jihadist attacks in northern parts of the country have claimed more than 300 lives and forced thousands from their homes these past 2 years. France 24's Gaël Borgia has more from Antananarivo, where the pontiff will hold an open-air mass on Sunday.
In a country where about 80% of the people live under the poverty line, who earn less than $2 a day, sometimes and very often religion is one of the last hopes for them, and this visit is very sacred. Just seeing the Pope is a blessing for most of the people. The big highlights of this visit will be on Sunday. There will be a mass in a massive stadium, and 800,000 people are expected to attend this mass. And also the Pope Francis will meet for the first time the famous Argentinian priest, Father Pedro, who's been dedicating his life to the poorest of the capital for about 50 years. He created an association and built schools and houses for homeless people of the capital, people who live out of the dump garbage of the capital. So he did a lot for the country, and he's become an iconic figure. And it's the meeting between Father Pedro and the priest is one of the long-awaited moments of this visit.
For months now, residents in central Mali have been caught up in a wave of violence with both jihadist groups and local militia committing atrocities in the region. But although the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as MINUSMA, has strengthened its forces in the region, its influence on the ground is limited. France 24's Christelle Pire and Frank Hersey have this report.
A UN patrol arrives at Diambolo-Lay, just a few kilometers from Bandiagara. Within minutes, the situation becomes tense.
The
Blue Berets aren't welcome in this village of the Dogon people. Back in March, it was raided by suspected jihadists.
4 people were killed right here. Over there, 1 or 2 more were killed. And on the other side, another person was killed.
His hands trembling, this man asks the soldiers to leave.
You've come with your weapons, so of course we're afraid. We're scared. My property was completely destroyed. All my crops were burned, and now you come with your weapons. I'm afraid. I can't even speak. I just can't.
Around 30 women chase away the soldiers. Locals are afraid they'll be targeted by militants if they're accused of collaborating with the peacemakers. However, the women do support fighters from the Danna and Basagu militia who operate from the village. These armed hunters claim to protect the Dogon, but are also suspected of attacks on several Fulani communities. In places like Diambolo-Lay and nearby Fiko, people rely more on hunters than MINUSMA forces for their protection.
We see them as they go by, but to say that we trust them based on that, when we don't see any results from their work, it's not possible to say that there's trust there. And when we call for them, they don't come right away. When attackers come at night, they refuse to come. They only come when it's during the day.
Because MINUSMA is tightly bound by its mandate, the force is there only to support Malian authorities.
To engage directly and be part of conflict, that is not the role of the United Nations mission in Mali. We're not there to fight, but to ensure a safe environment.
Patrols, helicopter overflights, or building premises for Malian law enforcement. These actions, typically in a support role, don't go far enough for the residents of central Mali. Mistrust has set in, not just towards MINUSMA, but also towards the Malian military, which tends only to show up several hours after an attack has ended.
Perhaps we don't react as much as we should, considering the current situation, which may be why the local population doesn't really understand our presence.
After a lull in July, violence has now returned to Bandiagara district, with attacks now happening every 2 or 3 days.
That does it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching. Coming up, live from Paris with Nadia Massi. Stay tuned.